and hopefully end on time. Mayor Jim Brown, just want to welcome all of you here as we progress towards the end of the visioning. Appreciate all the stakeholders involved, stakeholders here in this meeting and throughout the previous couple of meetings that we've had. I do want to recognize Councilman Miller is here as well. I don't see anybody else as far as the elected, but it's great to have him here and the rest of you as well. And really just as indicative of, I think, just expanding what the greatness we have downtown Cedar Falls. And so I'm excited about it. There's a lot of buzz out there about kind of, again, coming to this conclusion. I want to also, again, thank Farrell Madden for their work being done with this. I see a lot of staff here. Thank you for that. Some P&Z members, thank you for showing up, as things will probably arrive on your desk as well in due time. But I just wanted to welcome you and thank you for coming. And I'll now turn it over to Jeff Farrell. Brian.
Thank you all. I'd encourage you to spend less time looking at me and more time looking at the images. There's nothing to see here, much. And also, I don't know, can the lights come down a little bit? I should have asked that question beforehand. Regardless, I'm gonna launch into this. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor. And this is, I think, my fourth time coming back, and let you know a little secret. Coming back feels pretty comfortable. Plugging back in. This is a special place, and I'm not just trying to curry favor with you. Today, we're gonna really do a walkthrough of the vision plan document. This is a draft, first public review draft. I'm gonna talk about how to understand it and how to use it. It's not so much I'm gonna tell you everything that's in it or read through it. The sun would come up in the morning and some of us would not still be alive if I did that. Too much there. Many chapters, an executive summary, which is the first thing to read, short and sweet. Things talking about the background, how we got started. The big deal is the Charrette Week and how we started working with you. And of course, ending with the next steps. And the appendix, which is there for those of you who really are, I guess, kind of geeky on the details and the demographics. You can really dive deep with our economist. Please don't try and read this. This will all be actually on the, you're going to be able to download this or view it on the web tomorrow. But there's more to it than this. These are the basic points that came out of the whole process of working with you, starting from the beginning through the charrette and the processing and our putting that together afterwards. The City Council started us out with some really great guidelines. These are very smart, how to proceed, what to be careful about. And our analysis, I want to stress these first 2 pages of analysis, we started with you, with what you all think and understand about your community. It's your community, you've been living here, some of you all your lives, a long time. So we're asking you what you like, what you don't like, what you know, what you don't know. And there's also the other stuff where our economist looks at the market demographics, market studies to get the big picture. Our zoning expert, our conventional zoning expert, reads your zoning, as do we, thoroughly, and starts to analyze that and see what's right and what's wrong with it. And our transportation guy looks at your existing studies and current reality, et cetera, to get a background. So when we start to work with you on the charrette, we have a lot of information. We have a lot of knowledge base. The Charrette Week, where we have our hands-on visioning workshop, is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where we do a very different process. Instead of coming to you and saying, how do you like this design? How do you like this design? Or do you want to buy a watch? We sit down with you and say, what is it you like, don't like in your community, and what would you like to see it become? What would you like to see it grow into in the future? So it's a very citizen, stakeholder-based process. And here's the most important part of that process is when, after you were sitting at your tables, working together, small groups, for what may have seemed like 20 minutes or a couple of hours, depending, you stood up separately from each of those groups. Somebody from your table said, here are the things that we want to do. Here are our concepts for moving forward. And after the first, second, or third table, people started seeing, and this happens very consistently, how much as stakeholders, as residents of the town, they have in common, the good things, the bad things, where they want to see positive development, what they want to be careful about. Then we had a charrette. The rest of the charrette week was, we took that, after the hands-on public visioning workshop, we went over to the Women's Club. We had an open design studio. We had a lot of meetings. We had technical meetings, technical studies. And this is an important point. When the people from Department of Public Works, et cetera, came in to talk to us, the utility people, instead of asking them just with a blank slate, what do you guys want? We were showing them what you all wanted, what the citizen vision, which direction that was going. And we said, how can we do this? How can we make this work? And sometimes there were minor little adjustments, but pretty small. But again, we're putting the citizens' visions forward. Now, the one thing I'm gonna pull out here and talk a little bit more about are the things that our economist, who's a town economist, she understands how towns and cities work in that environment. After the charrette, which she was a participant in, and after discussions in our meetings, she made these recommendations to us, and they're worth pulling out. Quick point about market economics and what the economists tell you. You don't let them tell you what you have to do this, do that. You let them tell you what you may do. Here are the possibilities, because there's still choice possible within that. Anita Morrison, Partners in Economic Solutions, I first worked with 10 or 15 years ago, so it's a long partnership. We have a lot of confidence in her. All right, buckle your seatbelts. I'm going to jump into the plan moving forward. The first part of that is the framework plan. Character areas. We have the two boards up here that talk about, it's really one set of character areas, but there are so many, we talk about each one, so we took two boards. Character areas are about two different things. One, what kind of place is it now? The downtown is a downtown. And what kind of place it might be in the future, how that might change, reinforcing some things, protecting other things. And a big point, character does not equal use. In our conventional zoning, and what those of us who've been involved in it as citizen activists or professionals has been focused on for about the last 50 years, has been use. And that's all we talk about, these minor, micro differentiations between different types of use. It's all about use. Character is more than just use. Here are two examples. They're pretty much the same use. And in many old zoning ordinances, they would be the very same thing. But their character, the way they live daily, is very different. One of them, it looks like the car is more important than the people. And if you're walking down the sidewalk on the right, you're mainly on a curb apron where a car could come in and out. It's a very different environment than what you see on the left. Same use, different character. Here, not only is it the same use, but a different character, it's the same store, it's the same corporation, Target. But the way it's arranged, very different character, different environment. Here's an example. Character is the public realm working with the private development. This is very much the ultimate public-private partnership. And I think both of these are pretty positive examples of that. And here's public realm, not so much with the private development. And it's not that those are bad houses on the right. Probably you go inside those houses and they're great houses, they've got great stuff, but you walk out the front door and you really want to go somewhere else. Character areas. These are the ones we identified, and I would say we. And by the way, when you get to these 2 pages in the report, can't remember if it's 31 or 34, read them very carefully, because in each one of these, there's a line, for instance, for the general downtown. There's some text that kind of describes what's there now. But then on all the character areas, there's a paragraph return, and it starts out with the words something like, under the imagined downtown plan, buildings will, yada, yada. And then it talks about things like maximum building heights, things about scale, things about use. So this is the first place in the report where we're really talking about the plan for going forward. The character areas that we identified, the general downtown, that very special area at the core of the general downtown, the parkade, the western transition area, this is really Clay Street. And this is the place where you really have a change, a transition from downtown, very different environment, to pretty much on the other side, Overland Park, single family, detached houses, classic Great American small town neighborhood. And the transition gets made on Clay Street. So that's a critical point. And then Overland Park. Now, by the way, if you look on the left-hand side, that would be west, we've got the line of Overland Park kind of following our boundary. That's not the end of Overland Park neighborhood. That's just where our boundary is. Overland Park neighborhood really goes farther out into the south. This is just the part of it that's in our study area. Then what we're calling the Main Street corridor, 9th Street and south, down to almost 18th Street. Different character than Main Street when it's up in the downtown or certainly in the parkade. And southeast neighborhood, different kind of neighborhood than the Overland Park, but still a neighborhood, maybe more institutional uses. And way down south, we sort of found this, there's just a very different place that is a southern gateway to the downtown study area. And then flipping back up north, what we're calling the Northwestern Gateway, First Street on west of the downtown. And I can't help but say, you know the term last but not least, up here what we're calling the Northwest Riverfront. It kind of is least, and I don't mean that it's not deserving, but in this area we've got the least input from the citizens on what that should be and how that should fit into the town. And that's really logical because that's a piece of property that is behind, it's off behind, it's a little bit out of sight, not on one of the major streets. So in that way, it's very much a core part of the, it's not a core part of the downtown. Part of the downtown study area is going to be important economically and you want something good up there, but it's not really part of the overall placemaking. Now, following that are what we've labeled frontages. These are where we start to get into what would be the regulations, what the regulations are about, which is the physical form, what's going on physically with the building and with their functions, the uses inside. And we've identified the general downtown, which is pretty directly tied to the general downtown character area. Urban buildings, multi-story, stand shoulder to shoulder to the back of the sidewalk. We do mention building height in here. It's maximum. Storefront frontages, which, truth be told, it's really the same, everything's the same, except there's a storefront on the ground floor. So as you're walking on the street, it's a different experience. And this is the type that would certainly apply to the parkade. If you're getting a new building, by some chance, the parkade's an incredibly stable area, but if someone were to do a new building, and I saw a proposal in planning and zoning for someone to really redo the facade, this is one place in town where you really want to say you've got to have a storefront on the ground floor. And they did, and did they get unanimous approval? Next, missing middle. We've talked a lot about missing middle. These are the buildings that are in between a single-family detached house, and they're residential primarily. They're not big apartment complexes. They're not towers. They're things that can start to fit into neighborhoods. Some right end, at the small end. Some maybe on the edges or on the bigger streets as they get larger. Notice that we have two scales of missing middle. We're showing you a small frontage type and a medium frontage type. And on the right-hand side, you see this green box pulled up. This is the box where we're talking about those elements that would become the core of development regulations. What are the maximum building heights? How much of the facade has to have windows or doors on it to be transparent? We get into, for residential, finished first floor elevation can be important. What are permitted things like bay windows and projections, frontage build out? Continuous facade length I should mention, because that gets to the issue of how big a building is, like a set of row houses or a small apartment building, before it really stops fitting in. If somebody does 3 or 4 row houses, and there's some right on South Main, I think it's between 8th and 9th, but I might be off by a block. They're about 4 units, fits in perfectly fine. If they went on, I've seen row houses in Savannah, Georgia that are 200 feet long. They're the whole block. And those are great, but they were built in 1600 something. But that's an element of scale. A couple of row houses, 3 row houses can fit into a lot of neighborhoods. If it's 150 feet long, then it becomes kind of like a professional linebacker in a daycare center. It just doesn't fit. So look at this carefully. This combined with the description of the character area is very important for what we're talking about going forward. A word about the illustrative plan. This is an illustration of a what if. This is not the way things will happen, but it's an illustration of things that could happen. Simply put, the dark buildings, kind of charcoal gray, those are existing building footprints. The terracotta or the brown buildings, those are illustrations of what we think could happen under the new plan to fill out the plan. You might notice there are a couple of parking structures in there. Let's see if I can, uh-oh. Let me see if I can delicately move the mouse. Yes, we're showing a parking structure, and that's not just a parking structure. You're going to see it's a parking ramp that is designed to fit in a city. It's not a naked parking structure. One here, down by the community center, and one here. That's next. These are prototypical things. So if you own a piece of property and you see a big building plopped on it, it doesn't mean that someone's going to come and build that or make you build it or anything like that. It may be an illustration of something that you might think about. You could build a building like that. To help illustrate this, besides the simple plan view where it's just a big kind of terracotta rectangle, we've drawn more carefully some prototypical projects. These are what ifs. They're placed on specific sites, so we have to deal with realities, but they're generally things that could happen somewhere else. The first one, and this is our guy Steve Price, this is 4th Street, looking towards Washington, how it might transform. What it is right now, and let's be honest, when you turn off the parkade, when you're about 5 feet off the parkade, maybe less, and you look in that direction, it's not pretty. It is, besides the sidewalk being beaten up, the way that the space is divided, et cetera, a lot of blank walls, big room for improvement. It's such contrast with the parkade, which is right behind you, and is the technical term for planners, urban planners, is it's really cool. Now, here's a set of pages that talk about exploring that parking ramp a little bit more in depth. Picture on the upper right, that's one that's very much like this that is built in Northern Virginia, where the ground floor has people and shops in it. People walk by it and may not realize there's a parking garage up above it. There are signs. If you're driving, you see a sign that says P and has an arrow. Looking more carefully at it, again, we're showing it on the half block between 3rd and 4th facing Washington. It is not a big parking structure that you see at the ground floor. If you have to walk down a sidewalk past a parking structure or even a parking lot, it sucks the life right off the street. And it also is a real estate negative for that block. That block does not generate tax revenue for the city. It damages the real estate value of the buildings across the street, et cetera, but there's a better way to do it. This page shows how a parking garage like that might be built. Cars enter off the alley where they're supposed to. That's why you have alleys there. The ground floor, the drawing in the bottom right is that kind of pinkish color, bubblegum color, is on the ground floor, all leasable space. So when you walk along Washington or 3rd or 4th, what you're seeing beside you are human beings, stores, could be offices. Up above it, you have parking. And I would suggest it's important to have those vertical openings to break down the scale, but generally save what's most important, which is the street level. In contrast, here's comparing existing condition, photograph in the middle on the bottom. I counted 49 parking spaces. Now, if the bank building were gone and it were just completely parking, you'd be able to get about 90 spaces there. Well, this parking garage we're showing, which has 3 levels of parking above the ground floor full of people, we got 276 spaces. So it's a big increase. But the cautionary tale is this isn't a profit generator. No one's going to build this, I think, and just volunteer to make 3 stories of parking available to the public. It needs to be a public-private partnership. This doesn't happen on its own. A building like this will benefit and take some of the parking load from all the buildings within 1, maybe 2 blocks. So it doesn't solve all your parking problem. It takes a big bite out of it. Here's another look at just a half block like that has to stand on its own. And there's room for slop in this, there's some subjectivity, but using what we think are fairly reasonable parking numbers, lower than the ones you currently have. If all the parking has to be surface parking lots, surface parked, we put it behind the buildings, not fronting the street, but counting on-street parking and what's in the lot behind it, you're kind of looking at 2-story buildings, maybe with a little bit of 1-story. That's just kind of goes with the territory. It's not necessarily a bad thing. As you see in this photograph, and some of your downtown, you can have really wonderful place with 2-story buildings. But this is just something we want you to start to weigh. Here's looking at it on another area. This is on Main Street, blocks on either side of Main Street between 6th and 7th. This is a place where the architect working on this project during the charrette really pushed it and tried to get as much building there as they could. So let's see, I'll try again with my arrow. You see that arrow moving here? What we have is there's some surface parking, but then also underneath the building. So these are driveways that are diving down under the building. So we're finding ways to really push that parking. Now it's parking down 1 level. That's different than really going underground parking. Yes, it's underground, but not so much. It's like a glorified basement. So it's not, the cost per parking space isn't as astronomical as when you're really digging down. But under this scheme, we're able to get a mix of 2- and 3-story buildings. Again, can make a great downtown environment with 2- and 3-story buildings, but it's an issue. I'd also point out here in the upper right corner, nice things that happen like recognition. This is already kind of a public civic green in front of one of the church buildings, I believe. Actually, there's a parking lot behind it now here. But that has great trees on it. That is something that's like a little jewel that you can capture as you move forward. Saving that green would generate more value than you would gain by building over it. Now we're going to go to another look at trying to maybe build another parking ramp. Very much the same. This is just moving a half block behind where we were. This is the community center. I think you see it. It's in a drawing on the upper right, photograph on the upper left. The photographs of the intersection of Main and, I'm embarrassing myself, 6th, intersection of Main and 6th, is not the nicest way to come into the parkade area of the wonderful, very cool parkade area of Cedar Falls. You've got parking lots and gas stations, and it's not the best. This is a proposal that combines a couple of things. One is there's this basically same plan for a parking ramp with shops or offices on the ground floor, parking on the stories above. This would enable the buildings around it to be a little bit bigger, but it also is stealing some of the parking and the community center and the library for a little civic green. And one of the suggestions we make in the plan is you probably can't do the Civic Green without doing the parking ramp. They kind of need to go together. Otherwise, unless you somehow decide the community center could have half as many parking spaces, which I'm not expecting. So those three projects, I think, are useful to look at, to think about the interesting is a bad word, but the interesting relationship between parking and how much building you can put on a place. Parking really limits the amount of building and activity you can have in the town. Okay, we're going to move out of the general downtown into one of the neighborhoods. This is a prototypical project looking at the southeast neighborhood. Right now, across from Western Homes, and I believe they might be the owner of these two lots, but there's an empty lot, or empty space, about a quarter block. We looked at different ways that you might fill that consistent with the character area in the plan, and that's what this page is doing. Here, being across from Western Homes, seems the scale could be a little bit up a little bit. So we're looking at things like row houses, small apartment buildings. Notice that all of these are putting a nice face towards the street. Kind of by coincidence, both of these examples have front porches. They don't have to. They could have stoops or smaller front porches, but as the examples do. The parking is there, but it's in the back off the alley, and there may or may not be outbuildings, which could have small accessory dwelling units, sometimes called granny flats, but we know granny's never back there. I know mine would not stand for it. And then a new type that I don't know if it's been talked a lot in Cedar Falls, but it's talked a lot about with people going back into cities and putting different kinds of housing in the neighborhoods. That's the cottage courts. There's some great examples. Photographs on the bottom. Upper left is from Karen. And then one from California in the lower right. And there's an architect up around Seattle named Ross Chapin who really started to bring these back and done a great job with that. We've worked with him before. But this is a kind of an odd lot where 7th Street melds into Grove. It's an interesting spot, but here's something you could build there that kind of unites it. It's a bunch of small houses. They're drawn as 1.5 story. Typically, they're maybe, at most, 1 bedroom. They could be 2 bedroom. You can do things like lofts. But this is downsizing. There's a little bit of its own little community. There are great advantages to these. And you're making choices, reduced maintenance. They have the common green element is very important because it's kind of like a mini area where there's a little community of the people who live on that green will know one another better than they would if they just lived along a street. One of the many, here again, we're showing options for how things can go. Now, if I may make a big jump to what ifs, more at the scale of the plan. And we'll start off with where Waterloo Road comes into 12th Street. The current plan is, we saw it and we immediately wanted to do something about it because it's part of what makes us tick. There's a big freeway, we thought it was very illogical. There's a freeway logic that comes in too far off the freeway into the town. There's this big swooping curve that I could drive in my little red sports car at high speed. It's designed for speed. It's a big swooping curve. It cuts through the block structure, leaves a lot of curved, cut-up lots that are hard to build on. And it kind of encourages, whatever the posted sign is, it encourages speed into the neighborhood and really cuts off the southeast neighborhood north of it from that south of it. We're proposing a reconfiguration of that. This is, notice the term what if, where Waterloo Road comes in off the freeway, off the cloverleafs, and really necks down. And at the point where it intersects 12th Street, there is a roundabout. And there is no clearer signal than the crank to the right, crank to the north, and then the roundabout to leave no mistake that you are off the freeway, you are in town, and where speeds come down, walkability goes up. Also notice that But it starts to make real areas where you can really put a building. And these may be expansion of the community center, they may not, but instead of having the parking now that goes along 12th Street, their parking plan kind of zigzags to deal with the curves, because parking spaces and buildings don't morph like that. They're not like silly putty. So that's, I should have moved on to this image. So that's making this both more walkable and more buildable. So yes, there's money involved in rebuilding this street, but also there's some benefit and dollar value generated by having more buildable lots. Another what if, and if any of the executives from the Viking Pump Company are here, I would say to them, now you know what just the other citizens feel like, because now we're showing something doing with their property, just like we are with your houses. This is a what if, like everything else, done only if the Viking Pump Company, if it makes sense to them, but this is a proposal where they might, if they're making their operations more efficient or something. I'm so ignorant of their operations, only their executives know and their workers. But if they take the eastern half of their property and use the core of that for a large parking structure, some of which might be able to be shared with the rest of the city, but on the north and south side of it, they build a liner building where they could have more offices, workshops, et cetera, more building program, and on the ends, and start to make it now so that when you go down that street in front of the Viking Pump, on your way to the community Main Street Center, which is right here, you're not so much walking through a sea of parking as you are walking down another positive, economically valuable downtown street. And now we've jumped to yet another what if, and this is interesting. The reclaiming part of the wastewater treatment plant site is a big what if, but it was interesting. Probably this got mentioned by people as much as anything. It's very complicated. It's in the future. There's expense involved, but it may make sense. If this is going to happen, it's a very good idea to have a plan or a notion of how you would go forward. Now, in our technical meetings, the people who operate this thing said, even if there is a movement of the main facility or the main capacity to somehow cooperate with Waterloo, City of Waterloo, excuse me, Waterloo, we're still going to need maybe 50% of the land. And you know, when push comes to shove and the engineering is really done, it could be a little smaller, a little bigger. But we worked with that 50%. We made a drawing here. And this is laying it out and something out in AutoCAD, looking at the topo, and just to make it a little more clear, the red line, I took one of the topo lines that roughly corresponds to the top of the berm. So this red line you see here roughly corresponds to the levee, top of the levee wall. So we're talking about building back inside of that. And this squiggly dark blue line is a floodplain. Or a flood line, so some of this is in flood. Of course, when you get a major flood, I suppose it's all in flood. But the scheme here would be that these buildings are all built up. They have that super basement, which is like a huge parking plinth underneath, which in terms of parking would be very efficient. But when you go to this place, and most of this, when you're up on the streets between the buildings, you're actually up a level. So these are apartment buildings. They would be of a real downtown scale. It's an extension of the downtown, and we think it's very important to have at least 2 real street connections, not just one, because then it's just a pod, kind of a cul-de-sac off the city. Have those connections, and this scheme shows an idea about where you would enter into the underground garage, and we've respected the levee, and also there's an existing road that has we're trying to respect, just to keep this exploration honest. Another segue. I want to talk about streets now. One of the things about an urban environment is the public space, the first and foremost and major public space are the streets. And I don't mean the parts between the 6-inch curb face and the 6-inch curb face where the cars go. I mean the whole street space between the buildings, whereas human beings, the things we see, the public space, we walk down the street, or ride on our bicycle, or drive in a car, the whole street, that makes or breaks the city. You can have the world's greatest, most beautiful buildings, and if they're in front of horrid, ugly streets that are maybe just badly designed, maybe the cars are moving too fast, you don't feel comfortable in them, it cancels out everything. So we always make specific recommendations about what to do with the street spaces. These are proposed as models. They could happen in the future. Whatever your streets are now, at some point in the future, there's a maintenance schedule, things have to be rebuilt. It's an opportunity to move towards maybe a better distribution of places. All the street sections we show here, the examples, fit, and these are the 6 big ideas that came straight out of the visioning workshop from you. The ones that are in red are the ones I think directly linked to the streets. The gray ones, parking, historic character, housing options, I think those indirectly connect, but the red ones are really directly connected to what happens between the front of a building on both sides of the street. First one, and I want to talk about the section plan, is the section of Franklin Street right at Overman Park. This is really a small change. First photograph on the bottom left corresponds to the section. As planners and architects, we're very used to looking at these sections. And I keep getting reminded by people I know who are not planners or architects. It's a little bit of an abstract idea. This is like you have a sandwich and you cut it in half and you're looking at it. Except in a sandwich, it tends to be horizontal. On a street section, it's going this way. But what you see in the section here up above corresponds pretty much to the photograph down below. What we're proposing from that parallel parking tree strip and sidewalk on the right pretty much corresponds with what's existing on the photograph below. What we're talking about altering here is what happens to the left of that. Currently, there's so much, I would say, excessive asphalt beyond what's necessary for the cars to move in, that within that space, curb to curb, you can get these other things. 2 10-foot travel lanes, a 17-foot angled parking, and then you're over at the other curb. There will be discussion about the specifics of this, maybe especially the travel lanes, whether they're 10 or 11. But I would say these are our recommendations. In general, I'm talking about the rest of the street sections as well. These kinds of dimensions are in the manuals for context-sensitive design, so these are gone through engineers, and they're for the place. But these are models to be discussed as we move forward. Second set, now we're going to jump back to the parkade. Not the parkade itself, but that idea that as you walk down the parkade and turn down most any one of the side streets, you get in an environment that is in need of improvement. And indeed, the city is working on 2nd Street right now, and 3rd, and 4th. The city's on it. Stephanie's back there. We have proposed a couple of different options for this. And the way we've written it in the plan, one would be you might do a more intensive parking section that has more parking, double angled, right from Main Street back to the alley. So that first half a block would have more parking on it. The second half would be more like it is now, with angled parking on one side, parallel on the other. I'll show you that one first because, roughly speaking, that's what you have now. However, your travel lanes are not 10 feet. It's hard to say what they are. There's a whole lot of excess asphalt. So what we're saying is we're going to put that really on a diet. And within that space, we could fit in this angle 9-foot sidewalk, 18 feet of angled parking, 2 10-foot travel lanes, an 8-foot parallel parking. I should have been an auctioneer, but we never made it. An 8-foot tree strip and a 6-foot sidewalk. Now, what we're doing here, those are tight lanes for automobiles. They're not too tight, but they're tight. 9 feet is ridiculous. But we're doing that on purpose because when someone's on the parkade on a side street, driving around, we want them to go very carefully and very slowly. We do not, this is a place, you are here, you are not about going somewhere else. Yes, you can drive through, but at speed, no. One other thing I would point out, we show the tree strips next to sidewalk. That tree strip doesn't mean that that's all grass and can't be walked on. In between the trees, you can do porous pavers or bridging pavement. So as a pedestrian, your feet see a lot wider area. The point being the tree roots see that whole actually 7.5 feet because of the curb. And what you get are trees that don't die in 7 years, but they grow and get up and get big and wonderful. So this is pretty much what you have now on a car travel lane diet. So you get more sidewalk area and trees. This pretty well corresponds to that nice transformation you saw before, the photo transformation that Steve did. Now here's the other section, and this is a choice. You may think this is the best way to do it all the way from Washington to Maine or Maine to state. But here's another option, which is we've squeezed in angled parking on both sides. So in proximity, right next to the parkade, that piece of Maine, you would have more parking, tighter sidewalks, but this is a choice, and this is a choice to be made and something to be discussed. We show you both. Next, what if I want to switch to is let's go down south and talk about, and it's interesting, the discussions about the possibility of going on a road diet from 4 lanes to 3. That's been discussed in past road studies, traffic study, and I can't recite the name right now, although it's here in the city's 2017 Main Street Corridor Traffic Study. And our own traffic engineer, and in all our experience, it makes great sense to us as a way of increasing the green nature of what that street is with really minimal, well, I would say, minimal cost to the capacity and to the reality of how that street gets used every day and driving on it. I'm not a traffic engineer, so it's maybe an unprofessional opinion. There's really no negative impact on the driver. I know some of you will take exception to that, and go ahead, that's why we're here. But what we're talking about is taking that really wide space, which for a lot of its length on the sides has this wonderful green character, big street trees, nice, relatively small, but front yards, consistent, houses, a few institutional buildings and offices, but it's a kind of a green, almost a boulevard introduction into town from the south. And consistent with goals that you told us you wanted to do, we want to expand on that, put in a left turn lane, it's part of that 4 to 3, and as you see in the picture on the lower right, in between the intersections, you could have sections where there's a median, a fairly wide median that would support a real tree, so you get, the greening goes way up, you get 2 travel lanes and 2 full-on protected bike lanes running right up the heart of downtown. Tree lawns, very adequate to, the idea on the sides, curb to curb, is we're trying to stay pretty similar to what's there. So there's not a big disruption, which would be bad for the existing trees and just expensive. But you've got the tree lawn, the sidewalks. So that part of South Main, from about just north of 18th up until 9th or so, becomes this much more treed, much more green environment for pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars. It'll be more pleasant to drive on. And the traffic engineers talk a lot about the 3-lane is a very tiny increment, carries just a little bit less capacity ultimately than a 4-lane. But the 4 lanes are very clumsy because when someone in that inside lane decides to turn left, it is a 3-lane section, and because it's a change, it's not a pull-off lane, you tend to get, it gets more dangerous because you have people who aren't looking ahead, or otherwise people maybe try and jump ahead of the line to get in front of somebody, so there's rear end accidents. But the capacity, the traffic engineers, and I believe this is pretty much hard science, are saying the ultimate capacity of this 3-lane conversion could carry twice as much traffic as the current setup right now is carrying. The 4-lane could carry a little bit more, but right now you're carrying X number of cars per day Under this setup, you could carry twice that with no problem. So we think it's, in terms of the impact on traffic, minimal, the impact on quality of life, maximal. The very next steps, the appendix I mentioned, I'm almost at the end, by the way. FAQs, I want to try and hit some off. When will the downtown vision plan be adopted? In November, and the public meetings that we want every one of you and 2 of your neighbors, bring them in November to come to this. Very important, will this plan require me to change my house business property? So your house or the Viking pump station, no. The second no is me yelling, raising my voice saying no, but I'm not gonna yell. How big can new buildings be? Well, it depends on where you are and what's appropriate. They can be bigger in the general downtown than they can be in Overland Park by quite a lot. So read that and tell us what you think. Talk to your neighbors about it and talk, I don't want to say talk to city staff about it, but actually it's not, that's a good thing too. This is your plan. How can I provide feedback? So many different ways. Online, but I think the most valuable way is to come to the meetings and talk to your neighbors and do it as a group. And if there's something that you don't get, something seems crazy, check it out. It might be a misunderstanding, or it might be that it is crazy, and we definitely want to find out before we start making this into regulations. This is the what next. Be able to get the plan tomorrow off the website? Yes. October 9th and 23rd, Planning and Zoning Commission review. City Council is scheduled to do the final plan adoption in November, and then we start on the zoning code update, which is where the big idea is we arrive upon this community vision, and then we change the zoning regulations. So if somebody wants to build what you guys want, that's easy. If they want to build something that's the opposite, that's not easy. And with that, I will stop talking, except in answering the questions, and we can talk at the boards, and you, sir, are first, and we can ask questions around the boards or up here. I'm here until everybody's gone. Oh, yes, sir.
Have you done a cost analysis of each facet of your plan?
A cost analysis of each facet. The quick answer is literally and 100% no. What we do have is knowledge from doing this for about 30 years. Our economist has not each and every plan, but knows, we know things that will pencil out and things that won't. But to go literally, we haven't looked at each and every proposal and figured out the cost per square foot of poured concrete and rebar. So at the appropriate level of this plan, we have a very good idea of what works and what doesn't. The other aspect is understand what we're going to come up with here are a set of development regulations that they may have maximums, but what actually gets built is going to get built by the private sector and developers who will be deciding if it pencils out for them or not. So we're not telling anybody to build something that's unrealistic. We're making sure that this plan, the parameters for this plan are realistic. So at that level, I've been trying to be honest with you. At that level, yes, we know we have done our homework, and this plan is in the right ballpark. Yes, sir.
You mentioned below-ground parking when the 6th Main.
Yes.
Are you aware that there used to be below-ground parking up there when Simpson Furniture was operating?
I am not,
Oh, you are now.
and I want to know more about it. I assume it flooded when the river flooded. Yes, sir. The costs of those, and I might even turn to a developer in the room to answer that question. The costs of, no, we haven't done a spreadsheet for each of those. We know those plans are in the ballpark for what makes economic sense from our economists and what is buildable and what is parkable. And these are examples of what could get built, not what must get built or what will get built. We're not telling people what to build. We're setting up the parameters within which they may build. Yes, sir.
Could you indicate, for even one of these pods that you're talking about? For one of the pods that you're talking about, could you indicate the range of cost? You know, if they do it this way and they do it another method. I mean, even one.
Do you want to?
Maybe I can just offer a comment here. As a private developer who has done a fair amount of work in the downtown, we presented a master plan similar to this, much smaller scale, obviously, in 2012, and have built about $40 million worth of property in the downtown. That was all done with private money. In fact, there were no taxpayer dollars that were involved in building any of what we've done. I would anticipate that this would be done in a similar sort of way.
And I would apologize to both of you for my misunderstanding. I'm not fast on my feet. Sometimes if I seem that way, it's just because it's a question I've heard many times before. But what I wasn't getting was the idea of what it's going to cost the taxpayer. Okay, well, as long as, I don't think that's our job. What I will say is all of these things are driven by and set up to be achieved by the profit motive because somebody makes money by building them. Because otherwise, none of it will happen. The exception to that, the asterisk on that is something like a public, a parking ramp, which is going to need to be a public-private partnership to happen. The city is going to have to participate and make that because on its own, it doesn't make economic sense. It's not a private sector developable project. The other things we're showing are all in the realm of what makes, what can and will get built. Yes, sir.
It's a vision. What's the time frame of the vision?
To be adopted or be built out?
Yeah, what your thoughts are, how far will this vision take us? Because obviously, things change over time.
Well,
Got involved with the building of the new high school, so you're thinking, what's going to happen over the next 50 years?
I think this is easily a vision for 50 years. However, that doesn't mean that in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, you're not going to be evaluating as you go along. How's this working? How are we going? It's like everything else, like having a kid, which I was once. You have to kind of do course corrections as you go. That's just life. As an overall vision, when you look at that plan, that's easily a 50-year plan. And looking at the other end of it, how long does it take for things to start really changing? And it does take a few years under the best of circumstances. However, I would point out, you've already started making a lot of these changes in this direction. So your foot's in the water already. But easily a 50-year plan does not mean that you can go to sleep and wake up in 50 years, as you know. Yes? I would encourage and urge you to read the plan, especially the parts where we're talking about moving forward. The introduction and the analysis and the things that were done in the past leading up to the Charrette Week may not be as captivating, but really where the rubber meets the road is what's going to happen in the character areas, what's in the frontage types, and how this. That's where we start to talk about how this might translate into regulatory language.
Thank you. Karen?
Just to wrap up
the presentation portion of it, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We have a really good crowd here. And there is an opportunity to take a look at the boards a little more carefully. And of course, you can look at the plan online tomorrow. You can certainly give us a call if you have questions about things. It will be moving through that public process as we move forward through the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. But this is intended to be a public review period where people have a chance to look at things and give us some comments. There'll be an opportunity on the webpage for this plan, I believe at least by Monday, maybe before that, well, there'll be an opportunity to actually comment online. So if you take a look at the plan and have a question or a comment, there'll be an opportunity to do that online, or you can contact us and give us a comment by email, or you can come in and talk to us as well. Tonight, we do have a few comment forms. We don't expect you to be able to react immediately because we're just rolling it out tonight. But if you do have a few comments by looking at the boards or thinking about a few things or have a question, there's an opportunity to write those down. And if you want us to contact you, have a phone number or something like that, or an email address, we're happy to do that as well. So once again, thanks again for coming out tonight. And
I did realize I had a question. Farrell, can you speak? I understand this is a draft plan. At what point will the draft become final?
so I think that through the regular review process, like a lot of the plans that we do, we'll have plenty of opportunities. It'll be at the Planning and Zoning Commission on the 9th. There'll be an opportunity for people to come to that meeting, and if you've had a chance to look at the plan in the next couple of weeks, you could give comments at that meeting, and the commission will be there to hear your comments. And then there'll be a second meeting at the Planning and Zoning Commission, so another opportunity. And so then we'll try to wrap up all those comments, and if there's any adjustments that we need to make, we'll work with the consultants to do that based on the input that we get over the next few weeks. And then it'll go to the City Council. We'll come back and do another presentation at a committee of the whole meeting. So if there's been any tweaks between now and then, we'll have an opportunity to address those to the council. And then, of course, it will go to the council for a vote and adoption. We're hoping that that timeline ends at the end of November, but yeah. A long answer to your short question. So the plan will be adopted, but we're working right now with the consultants, I'm sure, are working behind the scenes to think about what those development standards will be. We'll come back then in springtime next year to really look at the code changes that will be for adoption. Right, we're hoping it's more toward the 6 months, not a year.